Welcome to our geographical journey across the African Savannah, a place where the earth seems to stretch endlessly toward the horizon, where the golden grasses sway gently in the warm breeze, and where time itself seems to slow to match the patient rhythm of nature. As you settle in for this peaceful exploration, allow yourself to become comfortable, to breathe deeply, and to let your mind wander across these vast plains with me. I wonder where you might be listening from tonight, what corner of our world you call home, and what time it is as these words reach you. Perhaps you might share that with us in the comments below, creating a gentle map of all who journey together through this narrative landscape. And if you find that these geographical wanderings bring you peace as you drift toward sleep, consider subscribing to join us on future journeys across our planet's most soothing landscapes. The African Savannah extends across much of the continent, covering approximately 5 million square miles of land. This vast ecosystem lies primarily between the Sahara Desert to the north and the more humid rainforests that occupy regions closer to the equator. The word savanna itself comes from an indigenous American word that was adopted to describe these grasslands, these wide open spaces where the grass grows in abundance, but trees stand somewhat apart from one another, dotting the landscape rather than crowding it. The savanna began forming approximately 30 million years ago, when geological shifts caused Africa to become more arid, transforming once dense forests into these open grasslands that now characterize so much of the continent. The slow progression of this change occurred over thousands upon thousands of years, each century bringing subtle shifts in vegetation as species adapted or disappeared. A gradual transformation that demonstrates the patient persistence of geological time. The primary regions of the African Savannah include the Serengeti Plains, which cover approximately 12,000 square miles across Tanzania and Kenya. The Masai Mara, which extends over 583 square miles in southwestern Kenya, and the expansive Miombo woodlands that stretch across central and southern Africa, covering more than 910,000 square miles. These areas share similar characteristics while maintaining their own unique features, each one a variation on the savanna theme, each one home to its own particular combination of plant and animal life that has evolved to thrive in these specific conditions. I wonder if you have ever felt drawn to these wide open spaces, these horizons that seem to extend forever. Perhaps you might share what aspects of such landscapes appeal to you. What elements bring you a sense of peace when you imagine yourself there? The topography of the African Savannah is characterized predominantly by flat or gently rolling plains that typically lie between 3,000 and 5,000 feet above sea level. These plains are occasionally interrupted by isolated hills called koppies, rocky outcroppings that rise suddenly from the otherwise level landscape. These koppies are typically formed from granite that has resisted the erosion that wore away the surrounding land over millions of years. Some of these formations reach heights of 100 feet or more above the surrounding plains, creating islands of different habitat within the sea of grass. The savanna soil itself varies considerably in composition and fertility, but generally consists of a layer of clay or sandy loam approximately 3 feet deep, beneath which lies a zone of accumulated minerals, particularly iron and aluminum compounds that have been carried downward by water moving through the soil profile. The distinctive reddish color that characterizes many savanna soils comes from these iron oxides, which have been forming and accumulating for thousands upon thousands of years. The grasslands themselves extend in seemingly endless waves across the landscape, with individual grass species growing to different heights depending on local conditions. The tallest grasses, such as elephant grass, can reach heights of up to 10 feet during the growing season, while shorter species may grow only to knee height, creating a layered effect across the plains. The distance between individual trees on the savanna typically ranges from 30 to 130 feet, allowing sufficient space for the grasses to receive ample sunlight, while still providing isolated shade and habitat diversity. The root systems of these grasses often extend deeper into the soil than the visible portion extends above it, with some species developing roots that reach 6 or even 8 feet below the surface, allowing them to access water reserves during the long dry seasons that characterize this ecosystem. The boundaries between the savanna and neighboring ecosystems are rarely abrupt, but instead form transitional zones where the characteristic features of each gradually blend into one another. These ecatones, as scientists call them, can extend for many miles, with the density of trees slowly increasing as one moves toward forested regions, or the grassland gradually becoming sparser as one approaches more arid areas. The gradient of rainfall across these transitional zones typically changes at a rate of approximately 4 inches per 60 miles traveled, a subtle shift that nonetheless leads to significant variations in the plant communities that can survive in each area. As we cross these extensive plains in our mind's eye, we might imagine the gradual transformation of the landscape, the almost imperceptible shifts in vegetation that occur with each mile traversed. The drainage patterns across the savanna are characterized by a network of seasonal watercourses that may remain dry for months at a time, filling rapidly during the rainy season and then slowly diminishing again as the dry months progress. These waterways typically follow shallow depressions in the landscape, with gradients that rarely exceed a 2% slope, leading to meandering patterns that extend across the plains. In some regions, these seasonal streams converge to form larger rivers that maintain their flow throughout the year, their banks lined with gallery forests where trees grow more densely than in the surrounding grasslands. The water in these rivers moves at varying speeds depending on the local topography, but typically flows at rates between 1 and 3 feet per second during normal conditions, slower than many rivers in more temperate regions due to the generally flat terrain. The African savannah exists primarily because of its distinctive climate, which is characterized by alternating wet and dry seasons rather than the temperature variations that define temperate regions. The annual rainfall in savanna regions typically ranges from 20 to 50 inches per year, but this precipitation is not evenly distributed throughout the months. Instead, it falls primarily during a rainy season that may last from 3 to 7 months, depending on the specific location, with the remaining months receiving little or no rainfall at all. This seasonal pattern creates cycles of abundance and scarcity that shape all life within this ecosystem, dictating patterns of growth, reproduction, and movement across the landscape. The temperatures across the savanna remain relatively consistent throughout the year, with average daily temperatures typically ranging between 75 and 88 degrees Fahrenheit. The daily temperature fluctuations are often more significant than seasonal changes, with temperatures sometimes dropping by 20 degrees or more during the night before climbing again as the sun rises. This pattern of warm days and cooler nights affects not only the plant and animal life of the region, but also the movement of air masses across the landscape, generating breezes that typically reach speeds of 5 to 15 miles per hour during the afternoon, before calming again as evening approaches. These air movements help to distribute seeds, moderate temperatures, and carry the distinctive sense of the savanna across great distances. The interaction between temperature and rainfall creates patterns of humidity that fluctuate dramatically throughout the year. During the rainy season, relative humidity may reach levels of 80% or higher, particularly in the early morning hours, while dropping to 30% or lower during the peak of the dry season. This variation affects rates of evaporation and transpiration, which in turn influence the water requirements of the plants and animals that inhabit these regions. The transition between wet and dry seasons occurs gradually over periods of several weeks, with increasing cloud formation and isolated showers preceding the full onset of the rainy period, and progressively longer intervals between rainfall events, marking the return to drier conditions. The distinctive vegetation patterns of the African savanna have evolved over millions of years in response to these climatic conditions, developing adaptations that allow plants to survive both the abundance of the wet season and the scarcity of the dry months. The grasses that dominate this ecosystem typically follow a growth pattern tied closely to the seasonal rainfall, with rapid vertical growth during the wet months, followed by a period of flowering and seed production as the rains begin to diminish. As the dry season progresses, these grasses become dormant, their above-ground portions often dying back, while their extensive root systems remain alive below the surface, waiting for the return of favorable conditions. This cycle repeats year after year, the rhythm of growth and dormancy continuing with the same patience that has characterized this ecosystem for millennia. The scattered trees that are so characteristic of savanna landscapes have developed their own set of adaptations to these challenging conditions. Many species have evolved thick, fire-resistant bark that can withstand the periodic grass fires that sweep across these plains, while others produce small, tough leaves that minimize water loss during dry periods. The iconic acacia trees, with their distinctive flat-topped canopies, typically space their branches to maximize exposure to sunlight while minimizing resistance to wind. Their forms shaped by generations of adaptation to these specific environmental conditions. Some of these trees can live for 100 years or more, witnessing the passing of countless seasonal cycles as they stand sentinel over the grasslands. The relationship between grasses and trees in the savanna exists in a delicate balance, maintained by multiple factors, including rainfall, soil conditions, grazing pressure, and periodic fires. In areas where annual precipitation exceeds 35 inches, trees might naturally become more numerous, potentially transforming the landscape into woodland, if not for the counterbalancing effects of fire and grazing animals. These fires, which typically occur toward the end of the dry season, move across the landscape at speeds of 1 to 5 miles per hour, consuming the dry grass, but generally sparing mature trees with their protective bark. The frequency of these fires varies from annual occurrences in some regions to intervals of 3 to 5 years in others, each event resetting aspects of the ecosystem while simultaneously stimulating new growth once the rains return. Throughout these vast grasslands, the soil itself tells a story of constant cycling and transformation. The decomposition of plant material adds approximately half an inch of organic matter to the soil surface each year, though much of this is quickly processed by insects, particularly termites, whose colonies process several tons of plant material per acre annually. These insects, along with countless microorganisms, transform dead plant matter into nutrients that enter the soil solution and become available for uptake by living plants, completing a cycle that has continued uninterrupted for thousands of generations. In some regions, the activities of termites create another distinctive feature of savanna landscapes. Termite mounds that rise 6 to 15 feet above the surrounding plains, creating microhabitats with soil conditions that differ significantly from those of the surrounding areas. The wildlife of the African savannah has evolved alongside these environmental conditions, developing fascinating adaptations to the rhythms of wet and dry seasons. I wonder if perhaps there are places near your home that undergo similar seasonal transformations, landscapes that change their character as the year progresses. If you feel inclined to share such observations in the comments, many would find it interesting to learn how these natural cycles express themselves in different parts of our world. Among the most visible inhabitants of these grasslands are the large grazing mammals, herbivores that have evolved specialized digestive systems capable of processing the silica-rich grasses that dominate this ecosystem. Species such as wildebeest, which can weigh up to 600 pounds as adults, move across the landscape in herds that sometimes number in the hundreds of thousands, following the patterns of rainfall and fresh grass growth in annual migrations that may cover distances of 500 miles or more. These animals typically consume between 30 and 40 pounds of grass per day, converting this vegetation into the energy they need to survive and reproduce. Their constant movement prevents overgrazing of any single area, while simultaneously distributing nutrients across the landscape through their waste products. The iconic giraffes of the savanna have evolved in a different direction, developing their extraordinary height to access food sources unavailable to other herbivores. With adults standing between 14 and 18 feet tall, these remarkable creatures can browse on the foliage of trees that remains out of reach to other species, their specialized anatomy allowing them to spread their legs and lower their heads to drink from water sources at ground level. Their distinctive spotted coats provide camouflage among the dappled shadows cast by trees, each individual's pattern as unique as a human fingerprint. These gentle giants move across the landscape at an unhurried pace, typically covering between 10 and 12 miles per day as they browse from tree to tree. Predators, too, have adapted to life on these open plains, developing strategies for hunting in an environment that offers limited concealment. Lions, weighing between 330 and 550 pounds for adult males, rely on short bursts of speed and cooperative hunting techniques to capture prey that can often outrun them over longer distances. These social cats live in prides, typically numbering between 4 and 20 individuals, sharing the responsibilities of hunting, territory defense, and cub rearing among adult females, while the males primarily focus on protecting the group from rival lions. Their distinctive roars can carry for distances up to 5 miles across the open savanna, serving as vocal markers of territorial boundaries and as communication between pride members. Smaller creatures play equally important roles in this ecosystem, from dung beetles that can bury quantities of animal waste 250 times their own weight, recycling nutrients and improving soil structure, to harvester ants that collect and store seeds, inadvertently planting some of them and contributing to the dispersal of plant species across the landscape. The diversity of insect life is particularly remarkable, with some estimates suggesting that a single acre of savanna may be home to more than 50,000 individual insects, representing hundreds of different species. These small creatures form the foundation of many food webs, converting plant material into protein that becomes available to larger animals further up the trophic pyramid. The birds of the savanna add another dimension to this complex ecosystem, from tiny sunbirds weighing less than an ounce to ostriches that may weigh more than 300 pounds and stand over 9 feet tall. Many species have evolved specialized feeding habits that allow them to exploit particular niches within this environment. From the secretary bird that walks up to 20 miles per day, hunting for snakes and small mammals among the grasses, to oxpeckers that form mutualistic relationships with large mammals, removing parasites from their hides and warning them of approaching danger. The diversity of avian life includes not only year-round residents, but also migratory species that may travel thousands of miles to spend certain seasons on these plains, their movements coinciding with periods of local abundance. The seasonal rhythms that define life in the savanna extend beyond patterns of rainfall to include subtle variations in day length, temperature fluctuations, and even changes in the prevailing wind directions throughout the year. During the dry season, daytime temperatures may reach 95 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, while dropping to around 68 degrees at night. This daily temperature cycle creates patterns of activity among the animal inhabitants, with many species becoming more active during the cooler morning and evening hours, while seeking shade during the heat of the day. The movement of air masses across the continent leads to prevailing winds that typically blow from the east during certain months and shift to western origins during others. These changes sometimes signaling the approach of seasonal transitions. The interplay between temperature and humidity affects not only living organisms, but also the physical properties of the landscape itself. During periods of high humidity, morning dew may form on grass blades and other surfaces, providing a critical water source for smaller creatures and temporarily changing the reflective properties of the vegetation. As the dry season progresses, the moisture content of the soil gradually diminishes, dropping from around 30% by volume during the wet months to as little as 10% in the driest periods. This change affects the texture and cohesion of the soil, sometimes leading to the formation of fine dust that can be lifted by wind and carried for considerable distances, occasionally forming dust devils that spiral upward to heights of 500 feet or more before dissipating again. Perhaps you have experienced peaceful moments in natural settings that brought you a sense of connection with the rhythms of our planet. If you feel inclined to share such an experience in the comments, many would find comfort in reading about the places and moments that have brought others a sense of tranquility, similar to what we explore in these geographical journeys. The patterns of human presence across the African savannah reflect adaptations to these same environmental conditions that shape plant and animal communities. Traditional pastoral societies developed lifestyles based on seasonal movements that mirror those of wild herbivores, leading their livestock to different grazing areas as rainfall patterns shift throughout the year. These populations typically maintained low densities of approximately 5 to 10 people per square mile, their movements distributed across the landscape in ways that prevented overuse of any single area. Their traditional dwellings were often designed for portability or for reconstruction using locally available materials, with settlements rarely exceeding populations of a few hundred individuals before the modern era. In more recent centuries, these patterns of human habitation have undergone significant changes, with permanent settlements becoming increasingly common and agricultural practices expanding across previously uncultivated areas. The population density in savanna regions varies considerably today, from areas with fewer than 2 people per square mile in the most remote regions to more than 250 people per square mile near urban centers. These settlements typically concentrate near reliable water sources or along transportation corridors, creating patterns of development that extend outward from central nodes rather than distributing evenly across the landscape. The urban centers themselves vary in size from small market towns with populations of a few thousand to major cities where several million people live and work. The relationship between these human communities and the surrounding landscape continues to evolve, with traditional knowledge about sustainable use of savanna resources sometimes being integrated with more modern approaches to conservation and development. Protected areas established to preserve the natural characteristics of these ecosystems now cover approximately 10% of the remaining savanna lands. These reserves ranging in size from small sanctuaries covering a few square miles to extensive national parks that encompass thousands of square miles of diverse habitat. In these protected areas, the ancient rhythms of seasonal change, plant growth, animal migration, and natural succession continue much as they have for thousands of years. The patience of geological and ecological time persisting despite the accelerated pace of human activities in surrounding regions. The boundaries between protected and utilized landscapes often create their own distinctive patterns across the savanna, with differences in vegetation structure becoming visible from distances of several miles. As one approaches the edges of reserves or parks, these transitional zones present both challenges and opportunities for conservation efforts, requiring approaches that consider not only the ecological requirements of plant and animal communities, but also the economic and cultural needs of human populations living in these areas. The most successful models often involve collaborative management strategies that incorporate the perspectives and participation of local communities, recognizing that sustainable solutions must address both environmental and human dimensions of these complex systems. Throughout the savanna regions, the daily and seasonal rhythms continue their patient progression. The sun rising and setting with minimal variation in timing throughout the year due to the proximity to the equator. Daylight typically lasts between 11 and 13 hours, depending on the season and specific location. The consistency of these patterns contributing to the stability of temperature regimes across the months. The quality of light changes subtly with the seasons as well, the clarity of the atmosphere varying with humidity levels, and the presence or absence of dust and smoke particles in the air. During the clearest periods, visibility may extend for 20 miles or more across the open plains, distances that seem to compress as humidity increases, or as the morning and evening light creates different patterns of shadow and illumination across the landscape. As day transitions to night, the savanna transforms yet again, different species becoming active as others seek shelter or rest. The sounds of the landscape shift as well. The buzzing of insects and calling of birds gradually replaced by the vocalizations of nocturnal animals, from the whooping calls of hyenas that can carry for distances of up to 3 miles to the softer rustlings of small mammals moving through the grass. The temperature drops gradually as darkness deepens, sometimes creating condensation on surfaces that earlier absorbed the day's heat. This moisture reflecting moonlight and starlight in ways that create an ethereal quality across the nighttime landscape. I wonder which elements of these descriptions you find most conducive to relaxation. Which aspects of this geographical journey bring the greatest sense of peace as you listen? Perhaps, if you're still awake, you might share those thoughts in the comments below. The night sky above the savanna offers its own form of vastness, with minimal light pollution in remote areas, allowing visibility of celestial features that remain hidden from many more densely populated regions. The stars wheel slowly overhead as the hours pass, their apparent movement reflecting our planet's rotation at a speed of approximately 1,040 miles per hour at the equator, slightly slower at the higher latitudes where much of the savanna is found. The moon moves through its own cycles independent of the seasons, its phases completing in 29.5 days regardless of other environmental changes occurring across the landscape below. This celestial rhythm provided traditional cultures with a reliable calendar system that complemented their observations of seasonal shifts in rainfall, temperature, and plant growth, helping to guide decisions about movement, cultivation, and other activities necessary for survival in this environment. As our geographical journey across the African savannah gradually draws toward its conclusion, we might reflect on the vastness of both space and time that this landscape represents. The processes that formed these ecosystems began millions of years ago and continue to unfold with each passing day, each rainfall event, each change of season. The migrations of animals across these plains follow routes established over countless generations, reading the landscape in ways that reflect evolutionary memory rather than individual experience. The scattered trees, with their spreading canopies, have grown slowly over decades, adding perhaps less than half an inch to their circumference each year, while witnessing the passing of seasons, the movements of wildlife, and the gradually changing patterns of human presence across their domain. This patient progression of natural processes continues regardless of our awareness. The subtle interactions between soil, water, air, and living organisms, creating the conditions that define each specific location within this vast ecosystem. The minerals that form the foundation of savanna soils were themselves created through processes that unfolded over billions of years. From the formation of elements in ancient stars to their incorporation into our planet's crust and their eventual weathering into forms available for uptake by living plants. The water that falls as rain carries its own history, having cycled perhaps thousands of times between earth and sky, between liquid and vapor, between fresh and salt, each molecule following paths dictated by temperature, pressure, and the constant pull of gravity. As you drift now toward sleep, perhaps carried by these thoughts of natural rhythms and geological time, remember that the African savannah continues its patient existence. The grasses swaying in evening breezes, nocturnal creatures emerging from daytime hiding places, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky above. The vastness of this landscape and the slow progression of its natural cycles offer a perspective that extends beyond our individual concerns, a reminder of continuity and persistence that may bring comfort as consciousness gradually fades into the peaceful realm of dreams. And if these geographical wanderings have indeed brought you closer to restful sleep, consider subscribing to join us for future journeys across our planet's most soothing landscapes as we continue to explore the gentle rhythms of our remarkable world.